Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?
Please take your seats and fasten your seatbelts.
Flight crew, please prepare for takeoff.
Flight 229, you're clear for departure.
Thank you and enjoy your flight.
Hello, everyone. My name is Graham Mann, and this is the Business Aviation Podcast. On this podcast, we interview business aviation professionals with all sorts of backgrounds to learn about experiences, tips, and best practices to be successful. This episode's guest is Kellie Rittenhouse, Director of Aviation at Hangar Aviation Management. Kellie started work in the aviation world at an FBO and has since held a wide variety of positions, including customer service rep, charter salesperson, scheduler and dispatcher, and flight operations center manager, just to name a few. She's an FAA licensed dispatcher and a certified aviation manager, and has served on numerous committees and boards, including the National Business Aviation Association Schedulers and Dispatchers Committee, the Advisory Council, the CAM Governing Board, and the Michigan Business Aviation Association Board of Directors. In this episode, we talk about Kellie's career progression, some of the setbacks she's faced, her passion for customer service and fostering team collaboration, and more. Make sure to check out the show notes for details and links from the conversation at leansystems.co/podcast. Please enjoy this episode with Kellie Rittenhouse. Hi, Kellie. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So I want to start, before we get into aviation, back at your time in college, where you were an English major.
Yes, I was.
Why'd you choose to major in English?
So I was originally a journalism major, and I had a goal of being a award-winning journalist that changed people's lives and was a guardian of the truth. And in one of my first college classes, I had to write obituaries and wedding announcements and other sort of fluffy stuff in my estimation. I'm like, I'm not sure this is what I really want to do. It wasn't the higher calling that I thought it was. And so I continued to pursue some writing, and then also an education component of my studies. So I was an English education major, thinking I would teach on the secondary level and high school students. And I had a great experience in my studies, in my classroom, and then in my student teaching. It was really terrific. And then I had an encounter with a professor that I just completely deflated me, and I was so frustrated and embarrassed, and I wasn't capable of just taking the experience as a learning experience at the time, and it really flustered me. And at the same time, I had started working at an FBO, at flight school, charter, and maintenance organization. And I'd started working there part-time, and that was where I got introduced to aviation. And I sort of redirected my steps. But I've always been involved and interested in training and development of people. And so that goes back to my days as a education major as well. And it's one of the things that I really do love about aviation, watching people develop and pursue their dreams and achieve their status in either as a private pilot who continues on and moves down a path of a professional career, or someone who's an aircraft salesperson or charter sales or maintenance. I loved watching that evolution of their talents and experiences and seeing them pursue a dream. So,
wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Maybe we'll circle back to that later. But you're still involved actually in some writing and
Yes.
performing outside of outside of aviation,
Yes.
correct?
So for fun, I do a lot of things with my church community where I'm writing little vignettes and performing and or speaking, either doing a recitation of some sort or a performance, and have a lot of fun with that. I've done that over the years, and with adults and or kids. One of my other favorite quote hobbies, if you will, is I've been an instructor in the Dale Carnegie organization, a graduate assistant, I should say. I took the course and then I went back, and I've done it a number of times and worked as a graduate assistant. Again, a place where I can watch people overcome their fear of public speaking, sort of break out of their shell, tell you a story that's important to them, something that's impacted their lives, and just watch people grow and develop. And I love that. It's a lot of fun and something that I had experience or exposure to when I moved to Michigan and was working for the company was called at the time Chrysler Pentastar. So through the Chrysler's organization, I had that opportunity, and I really loved being able to pour back into other people. And that was something I did for a number of years.
Cool. So you mentioned while you were at school, you started working at an FBO. What was your role at the FBO?
My first job was to answer the phone and also schedule. There was a flight school and a flying club, and we would schedule the aircraft and coordinate the instructors with the airplanes, and that was what I started doing. I was working part-time on the weekends.
What led to that job?
So
how did you find it?
I met someone at my church. Actually, this gentleman was from Ethiopia. He was a commercial pilot there, and he and his family were displaced, and this was in Bloomington, Illinois, and he was working on earning his FAA license and credentials, transferring what he had from his international license. And he knew and told me they were looking for a friendly person to work at the front desk. And he thought I was a friendly person and I would be good for the job.
There you go.
So I interviewed and they didn't hire me. And the first person that they hired, it didn't work out. And so I was the second choice and I was offered the job. And so that was my entrance in. And then it really changed my life. So,
it's funny how those things work out sometimes.
Right. And I didn't know anything about aviation. The closest thing I knew was I had seen a crop duster who flew over the fields near my family farm. I grew up on a farm in central Illinois. My dad was a dairy farmer and corn and soybean. So we lived out in the middle of nowhere. And the only thing I really ever saw was a little crop duster every summer or spring whenever he would fly over and the field that was adjacent to my dad's property. So that was all I knew. I didn't know anything else about it. Mm-hmm.
So you started at the front desk, but you also took on some scheduling roles. At what point, you're an FAA licensed dispatcher now. Mm-hmm. Was it early on that you started training for that, or did that come later?
No, it came later. So I lived and worked in Illinois for about, at the FBO for about 10 years. At that point in there, I met my husband, and actually it's my husband's family that owns the FBO. And I always say I had the job first before the guy because I did. I was working there. But I started just working and doing more at the FBO, and I continued to develop my career. So I was involved with charter sales. We had an air ambulance operation. We flew organ transplant teams. I was the person who would take those calls during the middle of the night and then set up all of everything that needed to go with it, and then call the crews out and have them, go to the airport, go pick up the organ team and continue on. So I did just a number of different things through the years in Illinois. I was exposed to that's the scheduling that I was involved with then, and the coordination. And we did freight operations. We did special request things. I had a time where there was a woman who wanted to surprise her husband with tickets to an Elton John concert. They were going to fly into St. Louis, but she wanted to have a dinner with him before they left. So I organized the dinner in the hangar and had the friends come out and then sent them on their way. I just loved doing fun things. That was really fun. And if someone had an idea or a special request, those were my specialties. I'd be happy to throw myself into getting that done.
Right.
And then I got engaged to my husband, and he was moving to Michigan. So we had the opportunity to move here. And originally I took a job offer with a freight company because by then I was doing a lot of work with a large automotive manufacturer, and I was coordinating their just-in-time freight, and I'd made some business relationships with other freight operators, and I was offered a position up here. And I drove to the location of the company, and it was about 60 miles one way from where we were going to live. And I said, I can't do this. I can't do it. I'm already work many hours because this business is demanding in that regard. Different times of the year, it would be busier than others. And I was one who would stay and get the job done. And at the time, we didn't have the same tools that we have today where you could work more easily remotely and, be able to handle a lot of changes and not, you needed to be in an office or you needed to be at the airport. And so that wasn't going to work for me. I didn't want to do that. So I found an opportunity at Pentastar. It was Chrysler Pentastar at that time, Aviation, to come in and essentially start over. Because by the time I'd left Bloomington, I was managing a number of things. I was responsible for a number of different things. I had a client list of regular charter customers that I'd worked with and corporations. I had a book of business, if you will, but there wasn't an opportunity for me in that area at Pentastar. There was an opportunity to work at the front desk again. And so I took an afternoon position, which was at the airport was about 10 to 15 minutes from my home in Michigan. And I essentially started over.
Wow.
And so I worked for them for about 18 months. And it was funny because people thought I was just nice and that I seemed to know a little bit about the business. And by then I had quite a bit of experience in the business and I understood the complexities of the business. And I was working at the front desk. And there was an opportunity to move into a charter sales role. And I applied for the position and I was promptly denied the opportunity. I had not finished my bachelor's degree. I had my associate's degree, but the position required a bachelor's degree and I didn't have one. And I was dismissed. I was in the process of finishing it, but at the time I didn't have it. So I took a long, hard look at what I was doing and where I was. And I thought, I've been here 18 months. I wanted to get my foot in the door. This is the place I wanted to be, but it wasn't moving at the rate that I thought it should. And I was very capable and wanted to share my knowledge and my expertise. I'd even given some of my charter clients to the charter operations group, and they were working with my former clients. And I was trying to say, look, I'm legit. I know what I'm doing. But it just didn't work that way. So an opportunity presented itself to work for another flight department, a Part 91 operator here at the airport across the field. And I went to the president of Pentastar at the time and said, I really want to stay here, but this is going to hurt my resume. I'm more capable and I have an opportunity, and I just want to make sure there's not anything else that I can do here at this time. And he thanked me and said no, and I took the job opportunity across the field. And I worked for another Part 91 flight department for about a year. And almost as soon as I left, they asked me to come back. But the position wasn't a full-time position, and I had a full-time position, and it was giving me some more experience and also establishing some credibility, because now I worked for a very well-respected aviation director, and he was well-known and well-liked on the field, and my association with him somehow elevated me to a different status. So I decided I would stay the course at that organization. And then it was about 1 year exactly later that I was given an opportunity to go back to Chrysler Pentastar as a crew scheduler. And so I accepted the position. I went back in and I was responsible to schedule 75 pilots and 20 flight attendants. And it was at that time, in that role, there was an opportunity to earn my licensed dispatcher, my FAA dispatch rating. And that was something that would be a differentiator for me. And I was offered to do it while I was working. I didn't leave and go to a school. We came in early. We worked late. I had still worked my full job and scheduled and did all of that. And that's when I completed that part and got my dispatch license.
Wow.
Also, in that time period, I'd been involved. I had started attending earlier when I was still in Illinois, the NBAA schedulers and dispatchers conferences. And I would go to those, and that's where I met some of my colleagues in the industry, people that I'd been talking to on the phone that I never met, and we made connections and started to develop a very strong group of people that I networked with, and people who would later in my career help me and offer information. For instance, one person had more experience traveling internationally, and the first time I'd done a trip to Mexico, I called him and he took my call, and I felt like I'm just this kid that doesn't know anything and he's going to help me. And I loved that community of professionals. And so I set a goal to become more involved with them at some point in my career, when the time would be right, when I could participate. And so in that year that I was away from Chrysler Pentastar, I applied for a scholarship through the NBAA S&D organization, and I was awarded a scholarship, and I used it to finish up my bachelor's degree. And at the same time, I met some of the leadership of the S&D committee. And about that same time, I applied to be on the committee. And when I went back to Chrysler Pentastar, they were willing to support my endeavor on the committee. And so that was the beginning of my affiliation with the Schedulers and Dispatchers Committee.
Cool.
Yeah.
So just a couple questions. You did hold a ton of different positions through
Yes.
both at the FBO. You mentioned charter sales, customer service, scheduler, just to name a few. Was there, you sort of mentioned you took on more responsibility when it came up, but did you seek out the positions first, or it was just sort of a matter of you taking on more responsibility and you sort of gradually moved into those positions?
I took on more responsibility, and then there was more opportunity for me. I could see that things needed to be done, or perhaps there was another way to do that. And so I would just keep moving towards doing the right thing, and opportunities presented themselves.
Mm-hmm. And then, I mean, the other thing, going to the president at Pentastar's a pretty big move. Was there, I guess, what had changed between sort of your time during your bachelor's degree, for example, when you faced setbacks there, versus your time at Pentastar, that you felt comfortable going and presenting your case kind of to the president and saying, look, I want to stay here?
I think I became more confident in my abilities, and it wasn't an arrogant thing that I did. It was just a matter of fact. I thought there was no one who would plead my case better than I, and that I wanted to be respectful. I was very grateful for the opportunities that I had, and I just wanted to make sure there was not another area for me to serve in, or there was not another place that I could be, that I could do well there. And he knew the other director of aviation. He knew the gentleman. They were friends. And so I thought, before I do this, I'm just going to go and say thank you, and also ask, and then see where it goes.
Right.
No, right? There could be no harm in that. I didn't see there being any harm in that.
Yeah, there wasn't much to lose.
Nothing to lose, right?
And then in your Part 91 position, what was your role there?
I was the scheduler and office manager.
Okay, so sort of back to, I guess you'd had some experience in scheduling at the FBO.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And it was a smaller flight department. Trying to think of how many people, really. There were just a handful of people there. And I was just responsible basically to hold down the fort and be the liaison to the corporate office and schedule the flights and pilots. Yes, it was a great opportunity.
Right. Okay, so you went back to Pentastar, and you were in a crew scheduler role there, and you worked towards your dispatch license.
Yes.
Where did things go from there?
So at the time, Pentastar became Daimler Chrysler Aviation, because there was the merger of Daimler and Chrysler. And I was there during the transition to Daimler Chrysler. So I continued on until a point where Daimler Chrysler decided to sell non-core businesses, of which we were one. And they sold the company to Edsel Ford II. And during the transition time, I think I was a crew scheduler for about 3 years, something like that, 3 years. I had an opportunity to go into charter sales, which was my dream job. It was the job that I wanted. And I think I had it for about 6 months. And the transition back to Pentastar Aviation was happening, and Mr. Ford becoming the owner. And when that changed, I was sent back, if you will, to the Flight Ops Center. And I managed the Flight Ops Center, which consisted of the schedulers, dispatchers, flight followers.
Okay.
And I oversaw that department. And I did that for maybe like a year and a half, I think, or 2 years, somewhere along those lines. And I was also Mr. Ford's primary contact for his travel. So I had the group, I had the ops center, and then I had him as my primary client. And at some point, he decided that he thought it would be best if I took on a new role of what you might call owner services. Maybe that's what some people would call it. It was a customer account manager of customer accounts, because he felt the work that I was doing with and for him was very important, and we should have something similar for the other clients that we were managing. So I ended up with a small group. There were 3 of us, and we divided the customers amongst ourselves. And we were responsible to just be that liaison and be the person who worked with either the corporation or the individual client. And my office was still part of the Flight Ops Center, but I was more, again, of a liaison. And I had 2 guys that worked in my group, and we coordinated then with the maintenance group as well. So we were the on-site, if you will, representatives of the other managed clients and worked with them. So that started another chapter for me. I really enjoyed that work. It was hard. It was very challenging. I learned a lot. It was at that time that I always said I worked to translate plane, Plane, into plain, Plain language. And I would challenge my coworkers and colleagues that our clients were not aviation authorities. That's what we were, and we needed to become their trusted partner and help them manage and do the best with those assets as possible. And I spent a lot of time in working with contract negotiations, oversight of engine programs and maintenance programs, and just the monies that were spent, and looking at training for flight crews, and just balancing a number of those things.
Right.
I was also really involved with hiring personnel, and I would participate on most interview panels. And as in my career, I've seen us go from where there were an abundance of pilots to the current state where there are fewer pilots, and everyone, hiring is a really huge endeavor. And I was really glad to be involved in that process, because I think I brought a view of my customer. I understood the customer, I understood their likes, their dislikes, how they intended to operate. And I wanted to bring that to the hiring process. And as a former crew scheduler, I had a great understanding of the pilot group and what some people were interested in and what they weren't interested in, and how those 2 things often clashed. So, yeah, it was a great experience. It's a very good experience for me.
You mentioned it was challenging. Was that just because it was unfamiliar, or were there other reasons?
Well, each one of the clients had a different reason for their aircraft. And some of the aircraft managers were more challenging than others, just from a personality style and from what they expected. And so managing through difficult people and difficult situations, because everyone that flew on the aircraft were the most senior level people in organizations. And so everyone would be on a little bit on pins and needles as the flights, if there were any challenges, very high, everything was always very high profile. So that was challenging, but I'm a great problem solver. That's one of my strengths. And I've found myself using that all of the time.
It's a good role for you then.
Good. Yes.
You also mentioned that prior to this position, your charter sales was kind of your dream job. Why was that?
Oh, so at Pentastar, we had the ultimate equipment and people. We had really outstanding equipment, and I had no qualms about putting anyone on any one of our aircraft. Everything was maintained to the highest standard. The flight crews were trained to the highest standard. We had people who gave impeccable service. And it was one of those things where it practically sells itself. And we had very interesting people that would be chartering our airplanes. And so I just found that interesting. It was fun. Each trip was a challenge in that it was to somewhere different. And for me to be able to communicate to the flight crew, this is what we're looking for, this is what this is all about, and deliver great service, I just loved it. I did. I had a number of regular clients that I enjoyed working with and delivering great service to. So it was great. Very short-lived.
Okay, so the new position you were in, what was the actual title of the role?
The title was, I'm trying to, what was my
It's
title?
also not extremely important, but
I'm not really sure. I don't remember. My goodness, I've had so many. And I should tell you this. I should follow up with, when I came back to the crew scheduling role, and when I had also just finished my bachelor's degree. I'd come back, I finished that, and I came back, and that same president came to my office, and he shook my hand and told me that he was really proud of me in what I was doing and what I had accomplished, and that he was glad I was back on the team. And that was a really proud moment for me to have him recognize me in that way. He would very soon after that leave the organization, but the fact that he came back and he acknowledged me just spoke huge volumes to me, and I think probably encouraged me then through my career to make sure that I didn't miss an opportunity to, it reaffirmed my decision to go and see him in the first place, and then to also be thankful and grateful for any opportunity that came my way. And so I did appreciate that. I can still kind of see that scene in my memory, and it was a highlight. It was a highlight of one of the highlights of my career.
No, that is fantastic. I don't think it probably gets done enough, but I mean, I think that, as you say, powerful. Reaffirms your decision.
Yeah, and it's like it was a really powerful reminder for me to be able to do that with people in my life as well, because I felt so validated and appreciated in that moment. And it was awesome that he did it. And it was something that I thought I can also do for other people. So
yeah, no, that's fantastic.
It's a good reminder. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that was then. Yeah. So my other job, I can't remember my title, but I reported directly to the president of the company, and also to Mr. Ford, the owner. Because I don't remember what we called ourselves, but that was where I learned a lot more about just asset management and the operations. And I worked a bit at the same time then with the sales team as they were introducing Pentastar to other potential managed clients. So I would get involved with some of that work so that we could share what it is that our group, they had a dedicated account manager and that what they could expect from us and how we worked and what they could look for. So I really enjoyed that opportunity to also meet new and potential clients.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Mm-hmm.
And so where did that lead to your next position?
My next position ended up being, so I always kept a component of that position while I was at Pentastar because I continued to take care of Mr. Ford's account. So I was his primary person, but he asked me to move back into the FBO. Pentastar has long history of outstanding ratings in ProPilot and AIN for their service levels and their FBO and their but there had been a slight hiccup and that wasn't acceptable to Mr. Ford and thought that we needed to reevaluate and maybe revamp our services in the FBO. So I went back into the FBO and I then had the title of Director of Customer Relations. And I was responsible to work with the front desk, the CSRs, and the line service technicians and improve our level of service there. And that also included developing like a survey program that I developed and administered. And then I also developed a customer service training program that I rolled out to the entire organization. So at the time, there were over 200 people. And I, along with the HR, VP of HR, I believe, we co-taught the program. And then I rolled out a Pentastar service standards. And that's what we used for all new hires. And again, the whole organization was trained. And we just really focused back in on the customer and what we could do for our customers that gave them a unique experience at Pentastar, regardless of which one of the services they were using at the time.
And you'd obviously had lots of experience dealing with customers and clients and customer service, but was the training protocol, did you build it from scratch? And if so, sort of how did you go about learning how to do that and what to include and so on?
So I just did a lot of research on some of the most basic. I believe that great customer service boils down to simple acts performed consistently and of considering your customer first. We're a service industry and trying to put yourself in the shoes of the customer. So I just tried to take a lot of stories, things that happened over the years to me, things I observed, and sort of weave those things into the training. I also talked with a lot of our primary clients and asked them for some feedback on what was important to them. And it was interesting because you would get different responses based on their own personalities and their own temperaments, if you will. And I tried to utilize that. And I really focused a lot on communication skills, doing quick reads of people to understand their preferred communication style and tried to encourage people to consider that as they would interact with people. Mm-hmm. So for me, I would be known to tell a story. I'd love to tell you a story and weave some story into a conversation. And I had one person in particular who didn't care for any of that, who was straight to the point. One day I was with him and I was telling him a story about an inanimate object it was a table in a room, in this conference room that he and I were in, and we were waiting for a phone call to come in. I was settling him in and I was telling him about this table. And I said, it's an interesting story. This table has been here for a number of years. It was originally Lee Iacocca's. We keep it in great shape, and it's been in this company, this organization for however long, and was telling that. And he looked at me and he said, yeah, I don't care about that stuff. And I was like, oh, okay, Kellie. You should probably listen to your own training. He doesn't care about this stuff. And the greatest thing is that he was someone who I ended up developing a really wonderful rapport with. He was someone that I interacted with quite a bit in my career because he was an automotive industry leader, and he would be someone I corresponded with over different projects that we were on or how things were going. And I always think back to that day when he said, yeah, I don't care about that. Like if I would have been hurt by it or if I would have taken that personally, I may have missed on what became a really positive experience for me. And instead, I just used it as an example of, okay, some people don't want to hear anything else. Just, you don't have to fill the air with conversation, just the facts, ma'am. And so that's like one of my favorite stories about him. And I thought, okay, well, good to know.
Yeah,
on to the next day.
Everyone's got a different style.
Yeah, and that's okay. It's not right or wrong. It's just different, and that's how they would prefer that you communicate with them, and that gives great customer service. I promise you, I didn't ever bore him with another story or try to fill time. I made sure I was be bright, be brief, be gone, and it worked really well.
Right. No, that's great. So you implemented a new training program and some customer service standards.
Mm-hmm.
And did you move on to another role after that?
That was my last official title at Pennistar.
Okay.
And there was an opportunity on our field. There was a new aircraft and potentially a second airplane, and someone new to business aviation. I'd met him and I'd actually tried to win him over as a customer of Pennistar's. And we actually didn't earn the business. And there was a consultant on the field who was working with him to establish his own organization. And I knew the consultant, and I was working with this. There were actually two people. I was working with them, and they were trying to hire someone to come in and do some different things and get the flight department established. And I think they were looking originally for someone to schedule the airplane and do that type of work. And so I was trying to help them find the best person for it. And one day I thought, why am I not interested in looking into this and maybe starting something brand new and having the ability to put my own fingerprints on it to develop an organization? I thought, they're asking for a scheduler. I think they need something more than what they realize. And why am I not interested in this? And so one day I said to them, I'm not quite sure why I haven't put my hat in the ring. I think I'll put my hat in the ring for the position. And they were like, hooray, we've been waiting for you to say this. We didn't want to try to pull you away from Pentastar, because by then I'd been back with the company for 14 years. I, in many ways, was Pentastar. I mean, I loved Pentastar. I loved my colleagues. I loved what we were doing. We had a great group of people. It was hard work, but it was rewarding work. I had a terrific customer base. Yes, we went through very hard times, very difficult times. Mr. Ford bought the organization in 2001. He was supposed to close on the business in September, and September 11th, 2001 changed all of our world. So November 1st is when he bought the organization. So it was coming in a really difficult time. And then, in 2008, with everything that happened with the automotive world and the economy, I mean, we lived through a lot of really hard things, and we were coming out of those things. And I didn't really imagine me leaving Pentastar. It was just kind of, wow, I don't know. Can I do something else outside of here? And this opportunity presented itself. And so I was hired, and I was hired to come in and be the scheduler and the office manager and the other titles. And we were going to be a 2 aircraft operation. We had a domestic and an international component of the organization. And then I blinked and we had 5 airplanes. And my role changed significantly, and I would eventually become the director of aviation and responsible for the management of the facility, the people, and the liaison from the owner to the rest of the group. And that's where I am today. And I've been here a number of years, and it's been quite an amazing journey.
Yeah, so that's really interesting, getting into a company earlier and then seeing it grow. How exactly did the role change? I mean, you mentioned some of your responsibilities earlier, but how did that progress?
In some ways, it was just a necessity. I was the person who was here, and I had the background in sort of all of these areas. I'm not a pilot. I'm not a maintenance technician, but I have worked in almost every other area in the business. So I just used all of that past knowledge and my network to be able to get the job done. And the owner is someone who is not interested in people with lots of big titles, and he's interested in people who work and have a sense of urgency and common sense and apply those to your everyday work and not leave your brain at home, he likes to say. And I think I just really flourished in that environment. And it was just really a great opportunity for me. And so I started saying yes to more things. I think that's probably my theme of my life, is that I've said yes. Not sure how I'm going to do it exactly, but I say yes, and I figure it out, or I present options. I understand that this is a service business, and I enjoy serving. I enjoy seeing people pleased with their outcomes of their flights or the aircraft or being able to make things happen. I take a lot of pleasure in solving the problems, putting the puzzle together. And that really motivates me. And it's amazing what can happen to you when you just say yes.
I think that's great. So as in your role today, what do you spend most of your time on?
It depends. I guess it depends on the day. Right now, the last year was a focus on hiring. I hired a new chief pilot and then 3 additional pilots. That was a very difficult process. Fortunately, we found a terrific person for our chief pilot, and he's very collaborative. And I feel that we are taking everyone to a new level of both expertise and understanding of our larger business, or where we fit in the industry, because we do so much travel outside of the country. And he's got a lot of experience there. So it's been wonderful to learn. And again, I'm watching my other team members grow in their own knowledge and their own capabilities. But hiring is not for the faint of heart. And I'm grateful for every interview I sat through earlier in my career to have questions and to have observations and to, do the best to hire the right people, because our organization is different than a big management company. I expect my team to be more hands-on. So I spend a lot of my time reminding them of that. Like, I'll help you. Here's the basic information that I'm going to hand off to you. And now you are responsible to think of all of the challenges, think of all of the gotchas, to think of the passengers. Here's why they're going on somewhere, and put this together so that when you walk that passenger out to the airplane and you close the door, you've done as much preparation as possible, and we are expecting the most positive outcome. But it's because we've done this together. There wasn't a scheduling group that did it for you and handed you the assignment for the day. You were part of that from the beginning to the middle to the end. And then we'll brief on how did we do? How did everything go? And try to take that information and make the next trip better.
Right.
And so for me, one of the things that I really didn't want to do, because as much as I loved the experience I had in the Ops Center at Pentastar, I didn't want to take the pilots out of the planning equation, because there's something lost when you do that. And they don't have the same skin in the game if they're not in it from the very beginning and have the ability to question or to suggest or walk through the actual trip. And I think we're more successful in our trips and in our organization because we do that. And anyone here in the organization could see something that they're uncomfortable with or they have a question about, and they could stop the trip. They could say, "Is that right?" Or, "I observed so-and-so. I think he's having a bad day. Is he okay to go on the trip?" And just including the whole team in everything that we do, I feel that makes us a stronger group for it.
Right. And I mean, aside from making decisions like getting the pilots involved in the planning process or getting all the parties involved, I think you use the term collaborative work environment. Are there other things you do to cultivate that type of work environment?
Yes. When it comes to training, for example, our safety training or our CPR, AED training, even our pool drill, just our annual training events. I include everybody in our organization, from our lead line service tech and our aviation services, our coordinator. Everyone is included because I want everyone to have an appreciation for what the other does. And if we were to have an emergency in our facility, I would like to have trained personnel here as well. So we've brought people in on site, and I include them. I include them in the emergency response training as well. I'd like to send people to different training opportunities if there's a value that they can receive. I like to include them and then have them come back and present to the rest of us what they learned, and just acknowledging that every person has a role to play. I mean, you can't, yes, we need pilots to fly the aircraft. We need the maintenance technicians to keep it airworthy. And we need somebody to pay the bills and make sure that we're on top of all of those crazy international fees and the coordination with travel and the coordination with the tax man and, all of those things. And I want people to have an understanding and an appreciation for what the others do, because we just can't do it alone.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic. And I'm sure the appreciation everyone has for each other's jobs increases when that happens.
I think it does. And I'll send people out on trips to go see what it's really like. Because there can be a misconception, or sometimes it's like these guys are away for a couple weeks and it's like it's a vacation. Well, actually, no, it isn't, because they're not with the people they'd like to be with. It's not, especially when we're out of the country, it's not the same as being in the U.S. You're in places where it's not so simple just to come back to the airport and go out and get something on the airplane. You have to coordinate, have permissions, you have to have permits, you have to be able to explain why you need to go back to the airplane. You're in a different time zone. You're not eating food that you're accustomed to. It's a very different environment, and we travel to all kinds of places in the world. And so I want people to have an appreciation for, yes, it's interesting that they go interesting places sometimes, but it's not just it's not vacation. It's still work. And also to be able to keep things moving while they're out of the country, whether it's expense reports or following up on their training that is required, the computer-based training, just making sure that people understand that they're still expected to engage with the home base here, so that everybody is feeling part of this team, and we each have different assignments within. So that's a challenge, and that's something that I'm always working on. And if I hear little grumblings like, oh, they've been gone for a long time. Yes, would you like to have that assignment? Because I am looking for someone in that aircraft. Oh, no, that's not what I meant. They just have been gone for a long time, So, yeah, just keeping that and keeping people motivated to stay in it. So.
Right. No, that's great. So just changing directions a little bit, but you also received your Certified Aviation Manager, or CAM credential.
Yes, I did.
When did that happen, and what led you to pursuing that?
I am a lifelong learner. I like to have a challenge in front of me, and I earned my CAM, I believe it was in 2008, I think, 7 or 8. I'm not sure. I should have to go back and look at it. Mm-hmm. But there was a let me think about this. So I think it was 2007. I was a bit familiar with the CAM. By then, I had served on the S&D committee. I was the chairwoman of the committee back in 2000. I think it was 2004. I served as immediate past chair, and I was looking for sort of my next direction, if you would. What would be my next challenge? And I thought about the CAM. And then I told a couple of people, which was really, I thought about that later, like, oh, that was really kind of dumb, Kelly, because now people are going to ask you and they're going to know if you didn't do this. But I was one of the first people. Wendy Gavigan, actually, with Citigroup, was the first person from the schedulers and dispatchers world who sat for and passed the exam and earned the credential. And I thought that would be a good path for me. And so I set a goal to take the exam in October of that year at the NBAA base in Orlando. It was one of the last years that the exam was administered in a paper format, and it was a proctored exam. And so I set that as my goal and was studying to sit for the exam. I went there and sat down. I had a plan to use all of the time that you could have, like 3.5 or 4 hours, I think, to take the exam. And I planned to use all of that time and not pay attention to anybody around me, just sit down and do it. I opened the test booklet, and I promise you the first 5 questions I could not answer. I didn't know the answer. And I put my pencil down and I thought, oh my word, has anyone ever just stood up, took him the paper and said, I don't know what I was thinking. I can't do this. And I said, okay, calm down, Kelly. You have a plan. Stick to your plan. Use the time and sit here and get it done. And so then I took a deep breath and I just plowed through the exam and used all of the time. I think I was probably the last person to leave the room. Walked out. I was sure that I failed. And I, in fact, did pass. And so I was really excited because about the same time, I'm setting myself a goal of becoming a director of aviation someday, some way, somehow. And I thought that I wanted to prove that my other colleagues in the world of scheduling and dispatching and those licensed dispatchers and flight followers and customer owner services people, I wanted them to know that this was an avenue for them, an avenue for more responsibilities, for management opportunities, and that if I had people on my team who also were CAMs, that it would make us a better organization, because the CAM was initially earning the credential, but it's more important to continue the personal development, to continue to maintain the credential, and to continue to stay on top of the responsibilities and ever-changing dynamic in our industry. And I felt that someone who was working on that goal would be a great asset to a team. And it would tell me that they were committed to something larger than perhaps their own job, or, this is somebody who's dedicated to learning. And that was why I pursued it.
Right. Oh, that's a good story. I've been in a similar position of not knowing what's going on when looking at the first page of an exam, and it's not a fun position to be in. But
No.
It takes a lot to recover from that.
That's why I always tell people my part of taking the exam, that just have a plan, stick to your plan, and you'll be fine.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned you were involved with the S&D committee. Mm-hmm. You've also been involved with the CAM governing board and the Michigan Business Aviation Association board of directors, I think.
Yes.
Why has it been important for you to become involved in all these different committees?
I think it's important to give back. For me, the NBAA S&D world really gave me opportunities and opened my mind to the bigger business aviation community. And I wanted to return the favor, if you will. I was a scholarship winner. I've advocated for others and in the scholarship roles, and very grateful to all of the sponsors over the years who've invested in people to make our industry better. I'm serving out my last year on the CAM governing board right now. I've been a board member for 9 years. Seems impossible that that's happened so quickly. That opened me up to another great group of industry professionals, challenged me a bit to get outside of my comfort zone in the world of the S&D world, schedulers and dispatchers. Those are my people. I'm really comfortable there and familiar, right? For me, though, to continue to grow and develop in my career, I thought that was a great avenue. And then I could also help encourage others with a similar background to pursue the CAM credential and to help them develop in their roles as well. And I think if I can do this, anyone can. And I want to be able to be that encourager to someone else to just take a step forward in their own professional development. And with NBAA, Michigan Business, we have some great organizations here in Michigan. And I saw that as a place for, again, great networking, information sharing. I've had the great opportunity to participate with the other flight departments here in Michigan, and there have been such good resources. And again, I want to be able to be that for someone else as they either entering the business or if they have questions. And just it's just so helpful to have colleagues who've experienced things that maybe you've experienced or help you stay away from a pitfall. And I found them to be a really great group as well.
That's great. So, I mean, one thing that strikes me hearing your story is, and you just mentioned it, you're a lifelong learner, and you've held so many different positions that it's necessary to always be learning. Were there strategies that you applied consciously to make sure you were always absorbing as much as possible, or was it more about saying yes, being willing to say yes, and then figuring it out?
I think it's a combination of both. I'm a voracious reader. I also I ask questions. I've learned over the years that it's so much better to ask questions and from people who have different experiences than I do. I'm genuinely interested in people. I'm curious. And so I think I try to figure things out. And then I just also try to do a reasonable person test. Does this make sense? Is this what a reasonable person, or I try to vet things that way, or just go learn more about something. I try. I haven't always been able to do it, but just look at a different point of view and ask for someone else's point of view, because we just see things differently and get their perspective on it. And then I just keep doing different trainings where I can, and try to apply those things. But I do think it starts from a place of just saying yes, and I'll figure it out. And I'm sincere in my efforts, and sometimes I've not been successful. And I just try to brush myself off and say, okay, let's try it this way.
Yeah, sure. So one more question, and then we'll do some quicker ones maybe to wrap things up. But that first real major setback that or adversity that you faced while you were doing your undergrad, which I can imagine how tough that would be. Having gone through all the experiences you have now, what advice would you give yourself back then?
Oh, I would give myself permission to be comfortable in the decision that I made and to kindly hear out the professor, but not accept his criticism. He was wrong. And when I think about that now, I would so like to say, Kellie, he was incorrect and you did the right thing. And continue and don't be intimidated. And I just didn't have that capability I think I was 19 years old, and it was really unfortunate, but I think it made me stronger through other challenges that I faced, and where I just don't I don't have to take something personally. People are entitled to their opinions. People are entitled to having a different position than but I don't have to take that personally. So that's what I would tell myself. Oh no, you're fine. He's wrong. Continue. Yeah.
No, it's fantastic. Okay, we'll do some quick ones here and wrap things up. So you said you're a voracious reader. What are 1 to 3 books that have had a big impact on you?
Oh, well, so that's kind of hard because I have different things at different times. Right now, I'm reading a book called The Checklist Manifesto because I'm not a checklist maker, and I'm trying to understand my crew members, their love of checklists and everything. I'm reading that right now. I also read a book from Bob Goff that's called Love Does. And I like that idea of love is a verb. And that's been really good. Let me see what else. Reading a book called The Long Obedience in the Same Direction by Eugene Peterson. It's a very interesting book about staying the course. What else? I don't know.
Cool.
I can't think
the Checklist Manifesto is one that's been on my list. So
yes, it's really good too. It's really good. It's fascinating.
When you think of the word successful, who's the first person who comes to mind and why?
I think of my dad. And my dad wouldn't say that he's successful, but in my mind, he has been very successful in his life because he has been a solid support for many. And he is someone who put aside his own personal desires to take care of his family. And then he's raised 3 great kids, my brother and my sister. And he has been and is my biggest fan. I think he's very successful.
It's amazing. What is the worst advice you hear being dispensed in the business aviation world?
The worst advice.
Or common misconception?
Well, I think in a common misconception is that it's always just such a glamorous thing. My career has been spent watching people not do glamorous things and using their equipment as a tool, a productivity tool. I've had someone say to me, if I were really successful, I would never have to fly again because people would come to me. And so I think that that's one area. But another area, and something that is very near and dear to me, is giving one stakeholder in business aviation a higher priority than another, because none of us can do this alone. And I would rather see people having appreciation for what the others do. I think it makes for stronger teams and a more successful outcomes.
Right. That's great. Last question. If you had to give a smart, motivated person entering the business aviation world some advice, what would it be? Or what advice should they ignore?
I would love for people to say yes to opportunities and to get involved where people don't want to do things. If you can take the position that you are in a role to serve, not be served, you will have an amazing career.
That is a great way to end. Thank you so much, Kellie. What is the best way for people to reach you if they'd like to get in touch?
They can email me at Kellie, Kellie, at Hangar, HANGARMGT.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thanks. It was a pleasure.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Just a reminder, you can find show notes, links to everything we talked about, and more at leansystems.co/podcast. And I would encourage you to sign up for our email list to make sure you get notified about new blog posts and podcasts. See you next time.